Welcome. You are listening to Guiding Stars and the Jeffrey Wolfe Green School of Evolutionary Astrology. This is your host, Kristin Fontana, and I'm here with my colleague, Stacie Pazura, and a team of gifted evolutionary astrologers to discuss the archetype of Gemini, the third house, and Mercury, and how that archetype is expressed naturally. With so many outer planets in Capricorn, the sign that reflects the patriarchy and a suppression of natural laws, along with being in the middle of a Pluto return and Pluto conjunct its own south node in Capricorn, so much distortion of the archetypes plague our planet. So Stacie and I felt a reminder of how these archetypes were intended to be expressed naturally would be ideal during these unprecedented times. You know, with Aries, we learned about the soul's need for full freedom and independence in order to discover what it wants and who it shall become in this brand new evolutionary cycle. It's a Yang archetype, and all that energy moves out from the center. That's the sign and archetype of new beginnings. With Taurus, the evolutionary necessity requires withdrawal and internalization in order to discover a sense of individuality from within and to give it value and meaning. It connects to the soul's ability to identify its unique resources in order to be self-reliant. Emotional stability and a sense of security can then be realized. This is a Yin archetype. We have arrived to Gemini, Mercury in the third house, and within this archetype, souls have experienced the evolutionary necessity to project themselves out into the world in order to collect information, facts, and data. Thus, there's a great emphasis on the mind and the intellect. The information these souls glean, or the more information these souls glean, the more secure the soul becomes. The third house in Gemini and Mercury connects to the messenger and the need to express what the soul learns from the environment. You know, in natural times, with those having a strong Gemini third house Mercury archetype, I think of the runner in an Amazon tribe, a woman who would run between tribes to communicate information. Perhaps she's in a position of negotiating between tribes. And perhaps she even has a knowledge of other languages through the polarity to Sagittarius and the ninth house. So this is, you know, a need to be out in the world, to express itself, to communicate, and through the natural trine to Libra and Aquarius, this connects the harmonization between peoples in a way of, in this example would be the diplomat or the disseminator of information. And, you know, maybe this message comes with an intent to barter. Hey, this is what we need. What do you need? And then an ability to become a bridge. One example, again, of natural times and how this particular archetype might be expressed. This is a Yang archetype. And the words in this archetype, words are very powerful. They are very influential. What you say and what you hear people saying, or what you take in as being expressed, what you read becomes very powerful, and how you take that into the depths of your soul, essentially, especially with a third house Pluto. In fact, with a third house Pluto, words can be more dangerous when they're used in a certain way than being hit by a truck. I mean, it can influence that soul so powerfully, really more than anything else with that position of Pluto. You know, there's been points along my own evolutionary journey when I remember teachings back in the day and hearing Jeffrey say things to me personally about my own journey that became like tattoos in my soul. And one of the things that I used to do early on at the schools is go for runs. I'd go for runs before the school, or maybe I'd throw my running shoes after the school and go for a run. And he came to know that this was something that I would do, you know, and I often would be able to think more clearly when I would go for a run. And at one point he said to me something that would change my life, really forever. It sounds dramatic, really, when I say it like that, but it was this powerful. He said, "Hey, Kristin, what are you running from?" It's been 20 years since I heard those words. Since I heard those words, what are you running from? And I still think about them every day. Because when he said, what are you running from? A door opened. It unlocked a door inside of me. And I knew inside that door, there was so much hidden. There was so much within that door that I needed to explore, that I needed to remember in order to recover the full breadth of what my soul intended to be, in order to not repress what was natural anymore. And so I would encourage you, as we explore the Gemini archetype, to ask yourself too, if you have a predominance of Gemini energy in your chart, if you've been running from something. Through the square to Pisces, it reflects the potential for hiding when we suppress what is natural because we want to protect ourselves. And looking at this chakra image, Mercury connects to rules the throat chakra. Of course, it's how we express ourselves, and we can express ourselves this way through our voice. We can express ourselves through our touch. We can express ourselves when we write something. But Mercury rules the throat chakra as a ruler, being ruler for Gemini and the ruler for Virgo. So I'm thinking a little bit about where I want to go right now. This Mercury archetype is having my mind go in many different directions, but just yesterday, an event took place, and I've been thinking a lot about the power of words and the power of how we can express ourselves through our right for what is that right, Stacie? Expressing ourselves, freedom of speech. Thank you. See, freedom of speech. So the freedom of speech, when we've seen through Black Lives Matter, there's so many people out there expressing how they're feeling about what's going on in the world in terms of race and injustices along these lines. And just yesterday, I didn't plan on talking about this because this event just occurred, but John C. Lewis is a legendary civil rights leader who was recruited by Martin Luther King back in the 60s. And he played a big role, one of the big six in civil rights, the Voices, a big role in that movement in the 60s. And he just died yesterday at the age of 80. And he was walking with Martin Luther King from Selma to Montgomery, involved in Bloody Sunday. He spent 17 different, how do they say that? Well, not 17 years in Congress, 17 terms in Congress, as well as being imprisoned 40 times in his attempt to defend or to protect the rights of Black people. And so I wanted to bring this up today because, you know, this is a man obviously who is not only willing to die for what he believed in, but he put himself in the line of fire, using his words and his voice in order to do that. And I find it fitting, really, because even yesterday, there's a picture of him that was shown where he's wearing a mask and he's standing. He was also involved, by the way, at the march in Washington as the youngest speaker back in the 60s. He was 23 years old, speaking at the March of Washington. And find it here, how many years later is this from that point in time? I don't know, 65 years later or something. And here he's standing on Washington Avenue with a mask on, and those streets have been painted in big yellow letters, Black Lives Matter. It's a bit of his swan song, I think, you know, with the White House in view. The mayor encouraged and supported this to happen so peaceful protesters could stand on those streets safely. And so there's this incredible picture of him standing there with his mask and his cane. I mean, literally not long before he left this world. And there was something so fitting, so telling about that image. And I also feel like his death really reflects a passing of the torch, and it will reinvigorate and ignite everybody's passion for justice of some kind, whether you're a woman in a man's world or a different race in this country and you feel like you've been stereotyped and experienced judgment. And so it's really going to ignite that fire, I feel, in a lot of people to express how they feel and to really use this as a time to access some courage now with Mars in the sign of Aries to do something about it.
Yeah.
And Martin Luther King told John C. Lewis, now you go and get yourself in some good trouble. And some good trouble is about, getting in trouble for a good reason, making your choices worth something, making your choices matter, and doing something to make a difference. And I can't think of a better time for for John C. Lewis to leave this world than at a time like this, where he has really done all that he can. And now it is up to a whole hell of a lot of other people, not 6 people like in the 60s, when they really put themselves out there in that way and took the bullet, so to speak. But everybody on this planet to do something to make a difference so we can have more balance and more fairness, more justice. So I just wanted to honor him in that way today. And one thing that he said as well before his death, that the most devastating losses in his life were the assassinations of JFK and MLK in the same year, 1968. And yet he continued on. He still fought for the same things they were fighting for back in the 60s. And I wanted, go ahead, Stacie.
One of the really characteristic things about John Lewis is he was such a powerful voice for natural morality. I remember so many of his speeches and statements that he's made on the floor, and his words about the immigrants and the separation of children from their families was just astounding. And he was really known for being that moral voice. And so, yeah.
It's interesting because I was looking at his chart and we don't have a birth time, so it makes it tricky. He's got to have some strong third house planets. Has nothing in Gemini, but he has Mercury in Pisces. He's so compassionate. He's so emotional. A lot of Aries energy too, as you might imagine he would have, because he's really a fighter, a warrior, and he's got a lot of fire. Even MLK had to kind of temper his spirit sometimes so he didn't get in too much trouble. And one of his quotes here, he says, after Barack Obama won the presidency in 2008, Lewis stated that when we were organizing voter registration drives, going on the freedom rides, sitting in, coming here to Washington for the first time, getting arrested, going to jail 40 times, by the way, being beaten, I never dreamed of the possibility that an African American would one day be elected president of the United States. Mercury and Pisces. I never dreamed that could happen. So these images here is, a picture tells 1,000 words for sure. These pictures tell 1,000 words. What people are willing to risk, their own health with COVID happening, with the masks on, but they have plenty of words on those signs that really double the impact. And so I did really just want to say a few words about him today, about it's a current reality that we're all living in this country. And of course, it's now a global ignition for the whole world, because everybody on this planet experiences this in one way or another, or a majority of the planet, I might say. And so anyway, I celebrate him today and for all he did to do what he can for all of us, not just for the African American population, but for all of us. All right, we're going to really make a big swing of transition. This series is about how these archetypes are expressed naturally. And we're going to do what we can to help you remember what that's all about. And one of the ways that our soul types are expressed naturally, one of the archetypes is the Damon archetype. And Stacie and I have done 3 webinars on the Damon archetype, if you haven't checked those out yet, and what it looks like in a chart to locate certain signatures for that. So I wanted to share this slide that was produced by Linda that is so beautiful, and you can easily understand the access here, this mutable access, looking at Gemini today. So Stacie, I'd like you to share the story that God makes things very obvious at times when he throws things in our path to remind us who we are. So go ahead and share this with the listeners, if you would.
Yeah, so one day I was in transit, Mercury or Gemini, whatever.
In the car,
Yes,
driving.
I was. And there was a pair of lesser goldfinches, little songbirds, little yellow songbirds. And they were in a courtship flight where the male was pursuing the female and sort of coming in and making contact with her, and she was trying to get away. And at one point she dove down right as I was approaching them, and she went right into my windshield. And because she went into my windshield, so did the male. I saw him spin off. So I pulled over, I got out of the car, I found her in the road, scooped her up, found the male in the grass. The male was conscious, but she was not. And the lesser goldfinch is one of my favorite local species. So I was very motivated to try and help in this emergency. And I just remember not knowing what to do. And the thought of CPR came into my mind. I've known someone who's done it, but I've never been shown, I've never seen it done, I'm not trained. But I knew that that was the only chance for this bird. And so I just remember just channeling all of my will and asking God and just telling God, I'm relying on my intuition right now. Give me the ingredients. Let me know how many compressions. Let me know how many breaths. Show me how to do this, because I don't have time to look it up. And so I started, giving her compressions. I gave her some breaths, and eventually I ended up to this rhythm of 2 breaths and 10 compression. Yeah. And so in the process, though, I saw that she had some internal bleeding. You could see it through her chin, and I knew that there was nothing I could do. And so I turned my attention to the male, I had nested him in my lap, and he was just sort of looking around, and I just put him in my hand, and I just gave him soft, gentle, affirming messages. You're going to be okay, buddy. You're fine. You're safe. And he, progressively came back to his awareness, and he came to full awareness, and he just chose to stay in my hand. And he was there for probably about 15 minutes, and then he just flew off. And he was good and perfect. So it was an interesting situation. I wasn't able to save the female, but the first thing I did when I got home was look up the CPR technique for bird CPR, and it turns out that the compressions and the breaths, the rhythm, the interchange that my intuition told me was right is exactly what is called for in bird CPR. And so I didn't save her, but she taught me how to do CPR, you could say. And the male, just to have that really amazing bond of, hi, and who are you? He's looking at me, who are you? And it was magical, and it was really kind of profound.
That's incredible. And we were talking about it when you shared this story with me. And I said, of course your soul would call it in so you could remember these things.
Yes,
Right. You are a Damon soul. All the memories that we have from our past are held in the subconscious. And
yes.
80% of the choices that we make are results of what's held in the subconscious.
Yeah.
And I love what you just shared is you really tuned in Damon souls, which essentially are souls that are aligned with nature and animals, have spent many lifetimes in harmony living with animals.
Yeah.
You are a self-proclaimed Damon spirit, Damon soul, Stacie. And so there will be events in our life. Like I said, God makes things obvious. And when we are on track, we will attract more of those situations in order to recover what is natural within us and the power that we all have to express who we are more naturally. And so I love that story. It's such a beautiful example of that.
I do want to mention too that the picture that we're seeing right now is the bird. This is the male, and as you can see, he's fully aware, and he's just hanging out. So
It's so amazing.
yeah.
So yeah, Damon souls are pure emotion, and they tune into the pure emotion of animals. Animals do not have an agenda. That is the common connection that allows a Damon soul like yourself to have this bird on your fingertips like that, and that bird not to feel threatened.
Yeah.
So a natural expression of Gemini, third house, and the first sign through that beautiful axis that represents the Damon archetypes, or how it's expressed. I mean, Damon itself is a Jupiter Sagittarian archetype, but through the mutable axis, the third house, Gemini, Mercury connects to flying species and the diversity within nature. The diversity is massive in nature, in the animal kingdom.
It is. It's amazing. It's wonderful.
All right. Wow. So we went from Black Lives Matter to birds with Stacie. We're covering some Gemini here, diversity here. And I'd like, go ahead and introduce our first guest, our first speaker.
So first we have Upasika Deva. And Upasika was born in New Zealand, where he grew up in remote rural environments, experiencing unspoiled nature, reflection, and solitude. At 24 years of age, he realized he was only interested in finding deeper meaning in life and abandoned worldly aims outright. Upasika then lived in various communes around the world, which was when he first learned astrology. He also did lots of therapy and personal development work and dived deep into meditation. After 7 years of this, he emerged back into the world happier and more content. It was some years later, however, that he stumbled across Pluto Volume 1 in a bookshop and became riveted reading his Pluto house description. From then on, he did psychotherapist training. Today, Upasika runs his own IT business and an astrology consultation practice. Welcome, Upasika.
Thank you, Stacie. It's nice. Well, nice conversation to start off with, all about the birds and how that all links in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also about the voice on the planet at the moment. Isn't that resounding everywhere?
Absolutely.
You know, like never before. Such a lot of voices. So I've had many thoughts about this Gemini discussion archetype. And I also go for runs, Kristin, every day. Must be a Gemini thing. I don't know whether I'm running from something, probably my computer and work in the morning, but
it's definitely a Gemini thing.
yeah, definitely. And as you're running, you see all the variety in nature and stuff. And but I was thinking about Gemini because I think in many ways, I mean, all the archetypes are distorted these days. You know, it's the normal condition. But I was thinking about Gemini. I was thinking every sort of archetype's got its own pet rap. You know, it's what it's known for. You know, Virgos are neurotic, Aries are foolhardy, Sagittarians are blunt, Capricorns are ruthless, all these kind of things. And Geminis are scattered and superficial, is one way you could look at it. And I was thinking about it because not often is talked about the profoundness that actually underlies all the archetypes and how it comes through. And so I thought, before we go into the details of Gemini, because Gemini is details, right? Let's zoom back out from the whole zodiac. Come back out of there and come back to right into the beginning of everything, into the source. Now, so we can't really use words That's the whole idea. So you come back out to source, and there is no name for this thing. There's no source. It's a concept. So we'll have to use words to create the concept. But source is eternal, sort of infinite. It's everything. It's consciousness, pure consciousness, at rest. And it is unknowing. It doesn't know itself. And when I first came across that concept, I thought, how can that be? How can something infinite not know itself? How can source not know itself? And we're expected to know ourselves, so how come where we come from, it doesn't know itself? How can that be? And the reason is, if you think about it, and these are words, you can't really describe source in these anyway, but the reason is because how can it know itself? It is infinite consciousness at rest. It's oneness. What is there to know what? It's unknowing. So that there becomes the one thing that source does not have. It doesn't have knowingness. And then from within itself, that knowingness arises. And how? Because consciousness from within itself projects itself out into creation. And into that creation, the projection itself is motion. So I remember clearly Jeffrey talking about this on the message board. I think it was Rad talking about it on the message board. So projection is motion. So as soon as you've got motion, you've got an A and a B. You've got something going from one point to another. And that also is a process then. So this produces the universe. This produces magnetism, which is vibration, electricity, which is duality, and gravity, this projection, which is, gravity is energy coming down into form. And so here suddenly now you've got forms. And these forms are everywhere. This is the 10,000 things. And the forms are all in relationship to each other as appearing separate. And they also are separate now from their source. So suddenly from oneness, we now have immense diversity. And because the forms are relating to each other as separate, this creates change, this creates evolution, because new forms arise in the interaction, and that becomes mutation, metamorphosis. So here we are with the appearance of individual forms, all being separate and all feeling separate from the source. In other words, living in separation. So we have this, Yukashwa described it, this whole creation that is source projected outwards so that it can know itself, because it's through each form has a different perspective. That's how source knows itself, through the perspective of all the different forms. And here we are, and within creation, Yukashwa described it, the creation is multidimensional, and just one of those dimensions is the 3D physical universe, in which forms are concrete and 3D, and that is us living here in this 3D universe, and that's a tiny little part of the whole creation. So suddenly you get the perspective, and as we come down into our 3D world, and here we are, you in the evenings, or some people in the evenings, I'm in the morning, discussing this, all different forms. We're all existing as individuals, self. So we're separate. We have to relate to other people that are separate, and we have to relate, feel secure in our separateness, because we're also separated from our source. And the way that is done is through the self-image, which is the fourth house. So all the archetypes, as well as having polarity points, they also have this progression from one to the other. We've started with Aries, we go to Taurus, now we come to Gemini. It's a progression, and the next one along is Cancer. And it's in Cancer that the self-image is really represented, exists. But what is most interesting in the natural archetype of Gemini is that it is leading into that fourth house Cancer archetype. So what I want to talk about today, because this is covering things that aren't included so often with Gemini, what I want to talk about is the progression of Gemini into Cancer, just to start with, and how it functions there naturally. Because core to every person's existence is this sense of self, which is the self-image. But what is this thing? You know, this ego that we have, what is it? It's a felt, sensed self-image. I mean, it's not obvious. We don't go around with it in our face. It lives in the subconscious. It's just a bit below the surface, is this sense of self, and often you wouldn't even know it was there. We don't feel it. But it's an image. So that's a mental thing. Image is mental. But it's felt, sensed. So that felt is a feeling thing. That's the fourth house. And the sensed is physical. It's a sort of composite. And you don't know it's there until somebody insults you. And then the contrast of their words to you and your image inside, which is a third house thing. It's just a feeling of, this is who I am. It's based on a thought, but it's a subconscious thought that this is who I am. And that subconscious thought is a summary of who you feel yourself to be right now. Who am I right now? It's only when that is provoked by another form that has a different perspective to you that you feel your ego, your self-image. And this is a live, living organism within us, this sense of self, and we absolutely need it because we're separated from our source. We don't know who we are. And not knowing who we are, that creates emotional insecurity, as well as all kinds of other insecurity. But there is a need in humans to know who they are, which is different to animals. They can live in the moment. We struggle. And having this sense of self is vital for our survival, but it's also the purpose of source projecting itself in the first place, is into all these different forms, having a sense of self. Because each form has a different perspective, and this is the universe's, or existence's way, source's way of knowing itself and also continually expanding. So how does the third house relate to all of this? Well, as we know, it's mutable air. So air is the mind, mental. Mutable is changeable. And the third house is basically that thinking process inside. It's how the mind sees a distinction between things. It's constantly classifying, and it is the mechanism with which we deal with duality, all the different things. So as we're going through our day, it's chattering away, and it's constantly thinking about, what's outside in the environment, the local environment. Sorry. and what's going on in the internal environment, how that internal environment is reacting to the outside environment. And if we watch our mind, it's a sort of habitual chatter in the background. This is third house. It's constantly going. And what we're looking for is the natural third house. Well, the distorted third house is a mind that just will not stop. It's endlessly stimulated. It's the patriarchy loves the third house mind, you know, wants it and abuses it and just stuffs it full of things all through school and out into the world. So that third house, because our third house process actually feeds into our self-image, we've all got a distorted self-image as well, because the third house impacts that. And it's something that is, I think, quite prominent throughout the world, is a very, very distorted third house experience for almost everybody on the planet. And I've had several experiences that have shown me what a natural third house is, and how that can change how you feel about yourself. One of them was when I was drowning. I'd gone out to have a swim on Christmas Day with my girlfriend and a friend of ours, and it was getting near the evening. And I was playing in the water and didn't realize it, and dusk was coming, and I was only playing up to my waist, and within the space of about 2 minutes, the whole ocean changed. And the next minute I was over my head. And I thought, well, that's okay. I was just standing on the ground. I'll just swim back. So I swam back and stood up, and of course there was no difference. I was caught in a rip, and I was heading on out there. And I got way out behind the waves. The beach was deserted, and there was just two of my friends on the shore. They couldn't do anything. And I realized, well, this is it. I'd gone under many times. I'd taken in a lot of water, and I thought it was coming near the end. And just as I was floating out there, I noticed what happened. Within 2 minutes, I thought of everybody in my life, and then they were gone. And I had no feeling left for those people whatsoever. And that was interesting. And then silence, just me and the waves, the beautiful blue sky fading, dusk coming, and nothing else going on, and me and my body was struggling to survive. And within the silence, every so often, this very loud thought would just arrive. Swim there. And it was a direction from the mind to do something. So I would swim to the point it was saying to swim to. And of course, that didn't do much, but it was a helpful movement. It was helpful to survive. And then another thought would come, which was, wave coming, hold breath. And a lot of silence between these thoughts. And I hadn't experienced that much. I've done meditation a lot, but that is induced. This was very natural. Anyway, long story short, I ended up not drowning. A freak swell came in, brought me in, and I was unconscious when it brought me in, and I woke up as the waves were crashing in on the shore. That stunned me and woke me up. But I still remember the experience of this third house chatterbox mind and how it disintegrated into a natural state. And I think that that's something that is not realized, that actually the chatterbox mind that we have, how it's feeding into our sense of ourselves. We think it's harmless and we indulge it. We watch movies with it, we chat, we go to the cafe, we do all of this. And I do all of these things too. But I've become aware that the third house natural state is a distinct thing differently to its current operation. And the biggest thing is the level of energy that one has when one is paying attention. When you're paying attention to something, the mind becomes silent. And that is the equivalent of what I experienced when I was drowning. I was paying attention, vitally paying attention. And so I've been experimenting with that. Vitally paying attention when I go on my run, vitally paying attention now, vitally paying attention, doing whatever you're doing, and suddenly a lot of this thinking process stops happening. It can't happen when you're actually alert and aware, like there's danger. And this is the natural third house. Then, when you are alert, in other words, it takes energy. You've got to get your energy up and focus. Then your thinking becomes more direct, clearer, and more powerful. And that's the natural voice. That's the natural thinking process. That's the natural logic, is when you are really paying attention. But we space out and we do all sorts of things. And so I'm not saying that anybody should always be doing this, but I learnt and discovered it clearly that the third house has different states, and the true state to me is when we are really paying attention. When that happens, then we start to sense that felt sensed image, that ego, you can feel it. And that there is more self-awareness. And that is, it's very natural too. And then all sorts of good things come from that. But that's quite different to the third house chatterbox superficiality. It is very tuned into nature, and it's fulfilling its proper function, I feel, is in terms of the journey from source to return. So that when desires come, it's very easy. If you're really paying attention, which are necessary and which aren't, you move to the sixth house. You can very easily discriminate. Mercury ruling both Gemini and Virgo. The more you pay attention, the more that three houses, the third house, the fourth, and the fifth, we'll leave it out for now, and the sixth start to all perform as a unit. That's been my experience.
That's great.
You know, Upasika,
Yes.
you know, you use the word superficial. That's a common word associated with Gemini, and it just reminds me of one of the evolutionary intentions of Pluto is to really just gather facts, gather information. And one of the tricks about that evolutionary process is that you don't always have an integrating bottom line. And so it can really kind of manifest as a spaciness or a superficiality. So for me,
Yes.
just really thinking about how, you know, this is how these are the lessons for this soul, and they will learn it through the polarity point of Gemini or Sagittarius, where they get that integrating bottom line. So I have compassion. I have some compassion for that.
Well, absolutely, and I do too. And it's just observations. Wow.
Well, we have a few minutes here. Oh.
15 minutes?
No, yeah, it was. It blew by so fast, didn't it? It blew by so fast with all those dandelions. There it went.
I didn't realize that. Well, okay. Sorry about that.
I have a question though for you, because I do have a Pluto in the third with Uranus, and my mind can definitely blaze. It can go all over the place very
Sure
quickly.
would. Yeah.
It's not always a good thing. So when you talk about the natural expression of that archetype, though, and I really appreciated how you use that example when you were not attached to anything, right? And you're in between worlds when you were in that water.
Yeah.
But the way that you described it was receptive. When you're paying attention, you are receptive, even though it's an active yang archetype. There's an openness, right? There's a receptivity. There's a wholeness, or more of a holistic embrace of all that you're collecting through the polarity as you're integrating all of these kind of tributaries of the things that you're collecting. So would you say that's receptive? Would you use that word?
Absolutely. I've never thought of it like that, because Gemini is a yang sign.
Right.
But
that's
yes,
the first time I thought of it, but you were telling the story and it was such a perfectly natural expression of this archetype. I said, wow, I mean, and this is why we did this series, I have to say, because for all of us, we've been living, you know, through some very distorted times for thousands of years. It's really nice to remember what it really means at its root, you know. It is receptive it's not superficial is not receptive. right? So
No.
if you remove superficiality, there's depth.
I think it's amazing that you've sort of cottoned on to that side to it, because it's more flexible, it's more receptive, it is present. It's gone out to meet the environment, though. That's for sure. It's done that, but then it is receptive at that point. It interfaces very holistically. That's a beautiful way to put it. It makes me think of, back in matriarchal times, sitting around the campfire. What was the third house like for us then? Not stimulated with all these electronics and all of that stuff.
Right,
That's for sure.
Right, so you're just taking in the whole environment. One way I like to describe the Gemini archetype through polarities, Sagittarius, ninth house is like a braid of hair, and you're taking 3 pieces of information perhaps, or 3 areas of your life that maybe you want to express yourself in some way, because the Gemini archetype does not want to be doing one thing. It'll get bored out of its mind. It needs to be open to everything. And then to weave those separate parts of ourselves into one that embodies that truth, right, of who you are, or what you've experienced in the world, or what you've taken in as your...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the 10,000 things, the millions of things, and
Right.
we have to be there present with it. So this is a little slice of an example of something different, and I knew it was a bit different.
Mm-hmm. Love that.
But and as Stacie says, there is always this polarity is waiting for us once we have come to the point where facts aren't, the identification with the facts is not working enough to give us what we need. Then the breakdown of that foundation, that sense of self. Because I think when you started, Kristin, you said, the more facts, the better the person feels with the Gemini. Definitely, it's a it's a thing of interacting with your local environment and having a sense of knowing what it is critical to a healthy Gemini. Otherwise, Gemini is to deal with all the facts and the millions of things, and it's multitasking, and it is use of the mind, and it needs to be done well. Ideally with a purpose. It's just the purpose, bringing the purpose into it. That's the Sagittarius, Stacie.
Absolutely.
So it's integrated with your ego and your separating desires. You have to focus these things and get things on track, and then the mind is put to a good use. And I think that's where a lot of therapy is needed for people to feel healthy about themselves, so they can just get on with it. And then, they stop all this mind effing, to put it bluntly,
Well, I think that there's
become holistic about things,
Right. Okay. Well, we should do a whole webinar just on all of the philosophical and spiritual understandings of these archetypes. We can go so deep, and we can travel so far with all of this. And I loved your segment, Upasika. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Helena Garcia. Having found EA at a tipping point in life some years ago of what would be the beginning of profound life changes, and still happening, the gift and wisdom of JWG and the School of EA teachers allowed the unfolding of a natural perspective and spiritual dimension nowhere else to be found. Helena felt she encountered a unique structure where her soul and all souls could be embraced, integrated, and given conscious meaning, as well as the understanding of instinctively being shapeless inside. Love that. Her EA focus, developed over several years of study, describes a path of recovering and uncovering the sacred feminine, the divine mother, and her teachings through the feminine asteroids. Welcome, Helena.
Hello. First, I just want to say that, like you and Upasika, I also run.
So you do? Okay.
And there's also this old philosophy of running and thinking. They go parallel. And it's probably because you are more free from the chatter
Right.
when you do it. There are a lot of thinkers that go for a walk in their story to find their inspiration.
I just wanted to say that
not all the time running from something.
I wanted to share that Jeffrey wasn't suggesting that running was a bad thing.
Oh, yes, I understand.
Or moving even. I'm a Sag, he knows I need to move. But he found a moment to teach me about me, or to right, to force that reflection. And so I'm forever grateful for it, even though at the moment it kind of, you know.
Yes, I
so
understand. Sometimes we have to stop a little.
Yeah.
And well, I would be talking about Neptune and the Sun in Gemini, and Lilith's South Node in Gemini, and I will also go into Palazatina a bit. So
awesome.
First, I would like to focus on the common dynamic of Gemini being the archetype of the messenger you talked about, or the message itself, and how that core dynamic can shape the whole Gemini experience. If we look at the natural world for clues, this can be seen as the bird carrying the seed here and there with no specific aim or strategy or goal. Although if we look closely, its apparent lack of intention is not so much without order, right? In nature, the seed that is carried by the bird can grow away from the parent plant, and this tends to eliminate much of the competition for water, light, or nutrients that is common to happen otherwise. So this is a beautiful way to see the air trine as a natural process of evolution, how to relate, diversify, and freely flow, leading to a form of growth that is not by nature so much conditioned with survival needs, and it's also moving from Taurus to Gemini. For us humans, our seeds are to spread our words, ideas, messages we carry as a result of living our own personal stories, messages we receive from others' life stories, and the innate curiosity of living. Or as one of the most famous Gemini voices once said, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. Mm-hmm. This was, of course, Bob Dylan, this unique, timeless voice, and he had the Sun, Mercury and Venus in Gemini, and Neptune conjunct the North Node. So in every story, a universal truth is that the messenger carries a fundamental piece of information the receiver needs to carry on. With Gemini, wherever we have it in our charts, this is the place where we're givers and receivers of fundamental information that will allow new seeds to grow in some sort of common land we call the universal mind. So going back to this core dynamic of the messenger message shaping the understanding of Gemini archetype, it is important to also notice the inherent duality, because the messenger and the message are two different parts of the whole story. Gemini standing in the middle, trying to know how it can serve as a vehicle for this information to come or carry through, and its main soul its main sole purpose, and also its main soul challenge, because it needs to integrate the polarity point in Sagittarius. So a great way to understand and validate where we are on the right track and not going far out from our truths when it comes to the mind is that feeling we have when we had this new idea, this new thought form, this new connection appear in our minds, that we know it could only happen when we're touching or being touched by something much bigger than us. That is, in my view, why Palazatina is so universally accepted as a living goddess. In some way, she embodies the intermediate between these two worlds, between spirit and its guides and all humans, and she's the one making the connection possible. When we touch those moments of blissful inspiration, we all know her. So from a pure astrological perspective, Gemini will find itself at this place in the mutable Grand Cross, where it will be needed the Virgo discrimination of its own reality within the all reality that it spices, to find its own truth, while at the same time embracing the all. This will mean that Gemini, like the seed carried by the bird, grows many times in unfamiliar territories, absorbing the new as it comes, to at some point have to select where it wants to stand and grow from. The natural abundance from Sagittarius, in this case, abundance of information, and the freedom to relate and listen, coming from the Uranus-Libra trines, generates its own need to at some point retreat, take it all in, and later coming back singing its song. So this would be the most natural way Gemini could express itself, cycles of going out and going in, coming back with new things to share, new continuous cycles of giving and receiving, expressing the dual nature of the archetype. However, not forgetting the blessing coming from the inconjuncts, usually in a shape of crisis, it's a crucial part of this process to adjust to the undeniable responsibility of knowing what to say, when to say it, and to whom, which would be the Capricorn inconjunct. For that is where Gemini will deepen its message to voice the soul itself, the Scorpio inconjunct, which otherwise would be covered by a multitude of superficial issues or voices and an avoidance of responsibility for what's being communicated. So with Neptune relative to Gemini, which is a natural square, it's emphasized this idea we can indeed be carriers and receivers of Spirit's message to one another, but also at times the painful knowing we have chosen to use the rational mind to find our truths the hardest way, and that is through messages disintegrating illusion. To give some examples, we can have the blessing of Yogananda's universal message, himself with Neptune in Gemini, or the pain in Kurt Cobain, the musician from Nirvana, with the double signature of Neptune in the 3rd house and Mercury in Pisces, him being a voice for its generation's discontent, but at the same time, someone taking his own life at a very young age. So whatever Neptune touches is dissolved in some way or universally interconnected in another. And these souls will tend to communicate through metaphor, analogy, or story that allows for the multitude of whatever is perceived to be conveyed, which will include the process of integration of emotion, context, and facts in the whole message. Poetry or film, for instance, are excellent mediums for this channel. I have this natal position, and I remember an interesting experience of creating this habit many years ago, which lasted for a few years, where I would, at the end of each day, register these 3 things: the most interesting thought or sentence I read or heard, some thought or idea of mine, and draw the most beautiful thing I had seen that day. The results, I might say, still amaze me. At some point, I started to notice all these 3 things had things in common. Sometimes they made this full circle that completed itself throughout the day in some sort of meaning. It was an amazing experience. It taught me, and now I know that, to learn to listen to this thing we call spirit, source, God, goddess, and everything in our reality has its own reason to be where it is, and are we all a tiny part of that creation. On the other hand, with Neptune in the 3rd or Gemini, much that would be perceived, communicated, or to others, or listened to and accepted, that is, it comes in a way that is not in alignment with the soul's desire or inner truth and the accuracy of facts. Because naturally, the soul tends to learn from the disintegration of ideas, concepts, and connections, failing to meet any of the ideal expectations of Neptune, of how these things could be in mind relative to what they really are, with the sole purpose of eliminating anything standing in the way of true and meaningful communication in whatever realms they take place. So the current transit of Neptune in square to the nodal axis in Sagittarius Gemini, which will take months, some months long, emphasizes all of these processes as a global need to communicate our truth, but first somehow to recover that truth or eliminate any old attachments or beliefs still distorting the way distorting the way there. Because we see Sagittarius as the resolution node for that square, traveling now in Capricorn, conjunct the south node of Pluto. So we have to go back to go forward. For the soul with the sun in Gemini, giving special purpose to all these themes is part of the way the soul will create its own special sense of self. It's to creatively becoming this messenger in its own unique way, and at its best and natural way, be an inspiring presence for everyone it meets. Gemini's connection to the hands as well as the mind gives credit to the special connection to Palazatina, and these souls with the sun in Gemini can be keepers of ancient knowledge and practices throughout their work and careers that will be then passed on to others. I'll end with a special mention to Lilith's south node in Gemini, one of the 3 signs deeply connected to the natural root of the feminine, with a factual example of our current reality. This week, the niece of the current president of the United States released a book revealing all she knows to be truth about her uncle, with an expected impact on society, as we can see by the 1 million copies sold just in one day. So the writer itself has the south node of Lilith, conjunct natal north node of the moon, moon and Jupiter, all in Gemini. Look at this. So if there are women speaking from the depth of their original selves, I would say this would be one.
Definitely.
Yeah, I went to see the chart and it's impressive.
Takes a lot of courage.
Yeah. So this is it.
Wow. So, Helena, you really reminded me of something from Jeffrey Wolfe Green, our teacher, correlating to Neptune and Gemini and the messenger archetype. A lot of astrologers would ask Jeffrey, you know, what if I don't know what to say? What if I don't know what to do? There's so many things this chart could mean, and kind of get in their heads. And the one thing that he said, he was a very spiritual teacher, very aligned with God's will, and really encouraged astrologers to practice from that place. But he would say, you know, trust that your intuition is going to bring you the message that is needed when it is needed. And that's, you know, the way that he encouraged astrologers to really open up to God's hand in giving that message. So, yeah.
Yes, it's true. I have Neptune in the third, and this thing of the external environment things giving you messages at every moment. It's if you pay attention. It's really there.
Oops, sorry about that. Carry on, Helena.
No, I was saying that this is really true. If we make the exercise of paying attention, like Upasika was saying, our current reality, our daily reality, our minute reality will take us to that place when you know you're part of this bigger universe, and you have a little place in there, but it's not separated.
And then within that, the message arises. Is that what you're saying? Yes. With Neptune in the third?
Yes, of itself.
Helena, I wanted to share something too. I have a client, I just made me think about it. You had mentioned some film work, etc., that you've done, and she has Mars and Gemini in the 10th and Neptune in the 3rd, and that Neptune is the ruler of a moon in Pisces in the 7th. She just wrote a book called The Heroine's Journey for Filmmakers. How to create female characters that females relate to, instead of like the woman dressed in the man's suit, or the man, the Disney movie where the man is rescuing the woman, like, you know, enough of that already, you know, and they want to put these
yeah, well, one of the most interesting things of this aspect is when you tell the story, you cannot separate, you know. You have to get a vehicle that kind of allows the things to be presented as you see them, because you cannot separate them. They come in connection. You cannot learn about this thing if you don't, from the point I stand, if I have Neptune in the 3rd, you cannot convey the message if you don't convey a bit of the whole message you perceive. You cannot separate.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, well, let's move on to our next speaker.
Thank you, Helena.
Yeah, thank you, Helena. That was amazing, as always.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Ari Moshe Wolfe. Ari Moshe Wolfe is an evolutionary. Why is somebody laughing?
Because he was taking a fetal siesta.
What? Oh, okay. What?
I think he was meditating.
Oh, okay, got it. I can't see him. Ari Moshe Wolfe is an evolutionary astrologer, musician, writer, and intuitive guide. With honesty and compassion, Ari combines astrology knowledge with his intuitive wisdom and sound medicine. He is the author of Evolutionary Astrology, A Beginner's Guide. Welcome, Ari.
Hey. Thank you. So I'm going to speak about Mercury and Jupiter. One of the things that Jeffrey Wolfe Green spoke about with Gemini is that we have the difference between facts and opinions. So let's address this a little bit. Facts are an interesting idea because, as we all know, that nothing in life gives itself a name. Like, facts aren't actually written in the raw fabric of reality. We actually have to give the experiences and the phenomena of life classifications. We have to organize it in a certain way. And then we can identify facts based on that. So I'm wearing a shirt. This is a construct that we are recognizing. We're giving it a name. We're giving it some sort of classification. And we can all agree it's a fact that I am wearing a shirt. Where it gets confusing is where you then have your opinion, right? Ari Moshe doesn't want to be wearing any shirts. And I know that because he said in the past he doesn't like wearing shirts. And already it's sort of ambiguous. You're collecting data. Maybe I said, I'm a Sag. I prefer not to wear things I don't have to be wearing. And it's bringing it into context with other data and forming logical conclusions. And one of the tricky things with Mercury in Gemini, Mercury in the third house, and Mercury in general, is the mind. The mind's so tricky. It can literally take any stream of data, of facts, right, that are true. Like, you said this is a thing, that's a rock, this is a computer, this is a hand. Facts. And logically piece them together in a way to create logical conclusions that are then meant to actually say something about reality. And it's tricky because the mind can make anything logically cohesive. This is in part revealed by the square between Gemini and Pisces. The wholeness, everything that is, all that exists, is just what it is. It doesn't even exist in time. Like, reality itself, as Upasika was describing, once you go there, you can't give it a name. Classifications are bringing the isness into time and space and form. And so because of that, reality in its wholeness, in its undivided nature, the mind can project itself into life and literally think anything it wants to think. And we know this is true. If you scroll around Facebook, we're going to have on any topic in life, and I'm not even going to give you an example. Just pick any up and happening topic. You're going to find so many opinions, and each opinion is going to be validated by a construct of logic. And we actually can become very defensive. One thing that we often don't hear about Gemini is where Gemini can become very defended. And the defense within the Gemini archetype is because security is then linked with the logical constructs that have been established. And so it leads to a soul believing that they need to fortify their opinions with logic to say this is what's true. And we're not talking about Jupiter yet. Right? This is actually just within the realm of Mercury. And I was once in this class, a physics class, and it was an astronomy class, and I was asking the teacher about something metaphysical. I forgot. Maybe it was like, is gravity like always the law? Or, maybe it was something about astrology. And I just remember that her response was, that is pseudoscience. None of that is real. It's not factual. There's no real data on that. It's not true. So in her mind, which ultimately corresponds to how she perceived the world, and how we perceive the world really emanates from our desire. We have to trace it back to that. We're all looking at the world, and in this particular example, it for some reason just sticks out, pops out for me in this moment, that there's a very clear organization of perspective that says, these are the facts about life, this is what we know, and this is what's true. And if more information comes in, then there's actually often a dissonance. Like, I can't take in this data, I can't take in this information. We are only going to be able to apprehend and perceive more facts, perceive more data relative to the world that we're willing to perceive. And the world that we're willing to perceive really emanates from what we desire. This whole world that we live in and the entirety of what we come into experience and what we interface with, it's not an objective reality by any means at all. And what we see as factual, we're choosing what data to pay attention to, what information to pay attention to, what we think is important, what we're called to research. It's gathering more information and perspective and helping us understand holistically more about the world. But we have to remember that for every soul, there's ultimately a reason why we're all called to follow the particular logical streams that we follow, the information that we are recognizing that we're interested in. And it really comes back down to, what is the reason for being here? Why are we coming into this world? Because in oneness, there aren't any facts. One of my teachers said something so beautiful to me. He said that in waking up, the only thing that you will know is your creator. You won't know anything else. And I love that. Because to know anything else is to create division. It's like there's truth, there's God, there's unity, and then there are facts, data, information. And of course, we can look at all these levels simultaneously. But there's a specific path of discovery and unfolding, and that's our Mercury. That really enables us to then go out into the world and investigate, to research, to learn. To close this Mercury piece, you go into the library, and the question is, what are you going to read about? The mind can direct itself anywhere. And the information that we're called to, what we're wanting to encompass, what we're wanting to learn about, ultimately reflects back the unique way in which we are wanting to build upon our constructs, our understanding, through what we recognize about the world. And what's interesting is, a child will ask, the 6-year-old that I'm living with asks questions all the time. One question that we really haven't addressed with him, I'm kind of following his mother's lead on this one, is like, I don't get it. Why is, his sister my daughter, as opposed to his father, right? Because I'm not his father. He has a different father. He doesn't really get how his sister has a different father. And is it about the bird or the stork, or how does this whole thing work out? So the mind is grasping to logically piece things together. And Pisces, there's innocence. It's totally open until we begin learning facts, and until we begin establishing opinions. And the mind can actually become very, very rigid. And the need to find more information, to uncover more data, it really points to this need to find security and understanding. If we don't have understanding, if there's no mental cohesion, we feel lost. Gemini is a map. So it's like driving on the road, and if you don't know how to read the signs, if you don't know what a red light means or what a green light means, if you're looking at your map or your iPhone and you don't know how to follow the instructions from where to go, and you don't understand the directions, without a map that says where everything is and what things are, this is a right turn on this road, and this road is called this, it can be completely disorienting to our sense of belonging and participation in life, and thus fulfilling our desires, what we're unraveling. And this takes us to Jupiter, because let's bring us back into the car, throw out the map. So now Jupiter is going and driving and says, I feel like I'm just going to make a right turn. And that right turn is, okay, I see a tree, I see, a bunch of people holding signs, there's a cloud moving in that direction. Your sense of direction, and thus the information you feel you need, is really riding from a more intuitive place. The challenge with Jupiter in Gemini or in the third house, well, let's say this first, the intention here is to engage the intuition as a way to learn more about reality. But the challenge can be this never-ending search for more information based on the mistake that we can learn about the true meaning and nature of life through the mind, through logic. So it's like, let me read one more book. Let me search more in this realm of mental chatter. Let me gather more news media or more political, more. And so what can happen with Gemini in the third house can be this process of moving intuitively, and it's like through that intuitive process, we're gathering information, gathering experience, and we're learning. But the second we try to control it in a non-intuitive way, where we kind of give ourselves this belief system, we say, all right, these are the things that I want to learn more about. These are the things that I believe in. These are the facts and the opinions that I believe are most important. And it's no longer authentic. It's no longer sincere. Jupiter always wants to operate in this way that is very much in the present moment. The journey is the destination. And so there is potential total randomness to the learning experience. But it has to arrive from this intuitive impulse. I'm called to go here. I'm called to read this book. I'm called to say this thing. But if the reference point is an intuitive synthesis, then there will be a restfulness in the mind. Otherwise, you're reading the book, and then you feel like, oh yeah, that reminds me of a past association. And suddenly you're, researching global politics, or, getting in your car and driving somewhere to see how that flower grows. And the way this can operate can actually take a soul into a deep state of mental restlessness. I've recently left Facebook for an indefinite period of time. It's one of the best decisions I've ever made. And I've always wondered, when will I get to leave Facebook? When will I finally just feel justified in doing so? And one of the reasons why I've always felt to be on Facebook is, well, it's, I teach, I share my teachings, I post things that I'm doing, it's good for my business. And thus, I've always justified staying there. And one thing that has always been hard for me is, one, noticing my own addictive mind, right? Like, Jupiter anywhere can have an absolute lack of awareness of necessary limitations. It's like no sense of when too much is too much. Like always more, right? So I've noticed my own addictive tendency of like, oh, let me just go and wander and search for more information. But what's the intention? Right? Jupiter really gives that difference between going on a pilgrimage, maybe not knowing where you're going to go or how it's going to unfold, but being moved by the spontaneous and authentic impulse to find more truth for your own realization, versus the restless seeking. That's the real difference in Jupiter anywhere. The restless seeking, or a real inner drive for awakening, for expansion. And so I've noticed in myself how Facebook can easily be this never-ending giving of my mental energy. And I have Sagittarius in the third house, right? So it's like lots of things to read about, lots of things to talk about potentially. and it's been really great to not be there, because it actually helps me realize how conditioned my mind is to leave, to go somewhere. And it makes me really reflect on what's important to me. What information do I need? What am I seeking? Where am I directing the mind? And I appreciate the teaching that the natural state of the mind is rested, is restfulness. And it's very easy once we get into this idea of I need more. music plays and you can just let go because a journey is
Oh,
perfect.
no. Oh, Ari, would you finish your sentence? Because I really, what were
I
you
think that was
saying?
a I think that's how the sentence wanted to go.
There
But
are
that
no,
is Jupiter in the third house, right there.
yeah, there are no mistakes. So I have Jupiter in Gemini and Mercury in Sag. It's opposite.
Oh, that
I
interesting.
understand that well, and they're both retrograde. So I wanted to add about a retrograde Jupiter or Mercury in this context, because I do have them both, and my Jupiter's in the 12th retrograde. But is that it is, and we are talking about natural astrology, right? And when we see a retrograde in a chart, their soul's trying to recover something from the past. And oftentimes, of course, with the Mercury retrograde, we are trying to recover our voice. And with Jupiter retrograde, it can be as simple as recovering your nature, recovering your truth. What it means in essence is the soul has been collecting so much information for so many lifetimes, and with Jupiter maybe taken on different belief systems, and everything's just gotten crowded. It's like the cup that is overflowing with content, and there is no more room for anything else. And it reminds me too of like even being in school, and I would do well in classes that I liked, that I thought were applicable to my future, and I would just shut out, my brain would just turn off if I didn't think it would apply anymore. It was very difficult. And I remember, having to study for classes that I hated. I could barely handle reading a sentence of whatever it was, but would force myself. And then as soon as the test was over, I would literally delete everything. It would just be gone from my brain. So there's a lot of people with Mercury retrograde, of course, on the planet, because Mercury is retrograde a lot. And, it is definitely for people with the signature to learn how to be more receptive. Upasika was talking about that, and I like what you added there too, as a reminder, Ari. Just when the mind is silent, or when the mind is rest. What did you say? And then the mind is at peace when it's. What did you say?
I don't know.
know.
That restfulness is a natural
Restfulness.
state, and everything in life I'm learning brings us back to what's it for? What's it for?
Right.
What are you really looking for? And I think that's a
Mhm.
really important point of inquiry for Jupiter in particular in the third house.
Yeah, that was. It's a tricky one to have, like you said. It can be an exaggeration of the things that you're trying to take in. It can be, just an overload of that. So Jupiter in this context for you is about giving up something, Facebook, to make room for other things that you'd like to be thinking about and energizing in your life without crowding not only your mental space, but your emotional space with people's stories, right? And
Indeed.
we all have a story and a story to share, and so anyway, thank you for that. That was
And just to say one more thing, just to appreciate, data is everywhere.
right.
Information is everywhere, and it's just a really powerful point of self-reflection. We all choose what data to take in, what to process. Like we're bombarded with it everywhere, and so I think a big
Right.
part of the third house journey is really it's squaring to Virgo, right? So the Pisces Virgo is like you can potentially take everything in, but also the Virgo is we have to also have that discernment.
Right. Exactly. And for the retrograde people out there, you are going to be highly selective of what to take in. You won't even be able to take in for a second something that does not feel to be true or resonate for you. There just won't be space or room or care or want or wishes for it at all. So it's not a bad thing to have a retrograde. It actually serves you and is a good filter for your life. All right, moving on. Stacie, you want to introduce? Thank you, Ari, so much for that.
Oh, sure. So our next speaker is Deva Green. Deva is the daughter of the world-renowned master astrologer Jeffrey Wolfe Green, uniquely qualified to carry on her father's work. Deva is the author of Pluto and Your Karmic Mission, lecturer at BA conferences and NORWAC, and educator with the Jeffrey Wolfe Green School of Evolutionary Astrology. Welcome, Deva. Are you here, Deva?
Sorry, it was having some trouble unmuting. Hi there.
Hey, Deva.
Hi. Well, first of all, wanted to thank everybody so much. As you've been speaking, I've been thinking about, in a very Mercury, Gemini, third house fashion, about how beautifully you've all been sharing that the true strength of Gemini is that of communication, of communicating messages that are timeless, that aren't constructed from the intellect, but rather felt. And I will be talking about Moon in the third, and also Mars in the third. And from my understanding, unity and diversity, what you guys are sharing and expressing, is really touching not the branches. You're getting to the root. And thank you so much for all of your energies in doing that here today. What it also makes me think of is that so much of us, relative to this bombardment of information that's in the external environment, relative to fourth house, how do I interact with it? How do I relate to it? How do I develop that filter, what's true and not true? And that's where Gemini can become extremely strong in its natural state to communicate what the intuition knows, not the other way around. There is the intellect in and of itself does not know what is true and not true. And from my understanding, there are several natural pathways for us to spiritualize. There is not one right way. And the heart, at least from my perspective of one of the Gemini archetype, is unity and diversity rather than unity and the sameness. To embrace that we all have a natural path and finding our courage, Mars, and our inner security to express our truth, our messages that while we are all one, we are not all the same. And we are all designed in a specific way relative to our natural design, and finding our courage to express this. Part of the Gemini archetype in terms of being a messenger. Again, it's finding the strength, and especially in these times, bringing those who are not sharing perspectives. All of a sudden, we find ourselves communicating. We find ourselves reaching out in our own way, using our own hands relative to the natural expression of Gemini, our own unique form of communicating. And so I'd like to start with a quote from Jewel, who happens to have Moon in the third house, or Moon in Gemini. And it's a really beautiful song. It's one of my favorites. It's called Hands. And it says, if I could tell the world just one thing, it would be that we're all okay. And not to worry, because worry is wasteful and useless in times like these. I will not be made useless. I will not be idle with despair. I will gather myself around my faith, for light does the darkness most fear. My hands are small, I know, but they're not yours. They are my own. They are not yours. They are my own, and I will never be broken.
Wow.
From my understanding, it really speaks to what you guys have been sharing, that how do we know the truth? That may be more of a Gemini archetype, but it's more of what the feelings behind the words evoke rather than the words themselves. And I know from having a Moon in the third house that I've always been most sensitive to not what's said, but how it's spoken. And a typical third house fashion, I remember being very young and thinking, wow, this person said the exact same words to me that this other person did 5 minutes ago, but the way I'm feeling is so different, yet the words were identical. Identical words, and yet the way my emotional body would respond to those words could not have been more different. And it really triggered my mind into thinking about this, and how do we really know what's fact and what's fiction? I know we've all had the experience where we feel, even though these are these eloquent words spoken, when we tune into them emotionally, it really feels empty. It really feels like just words just to talk, to fill empty spaces, to make one feel secure because they're talking, and they can be the most beautiful words, but the emotional body is registering something missing here. And the moon in the third house really speaks to integrating one's emotional security through speaking to those more vulnerable spaces, feeling secure to communicate, even when it's not about like the distorted expression of Gemini. It's not about the weather. It's not about the movies. It's not about the most recent trend. It's about how I and you and how are we feeling today? What's happening in my emotional body and in the world, and how am I feeling secure or not secure? And I remember again being little, because it's moon in Cancer in the third, that I was told that I was a barometer in terms of how secure I felt. The more secure I felt with someone, I could just you couldn't get me to stop talking sometimes. And then other times, at the minute I felt insecure, whoop, it was like I could hardly speak. And working with children, I can see the same thing. I recently worked with a young one who they said had a language delay, and tuning into her, watching her in her environment, it was a security thing. And unfortunately, I didn't have her birth chart, so I wasn't, able to tell exactly what the chart was, but I'm really feeling quite strongly that she must have had Cancer in the third, because the more she became secure in her environment, the more she was encouraged to talk, the more that she was given permission to speak about her emotions. You didn't have to say this or that you could simply speak about how you were feeling, and everything would be received in a caring Cancerian light. It was all okay, however you're feeling. And when that happened, when she started getting nurtured that way, the way that she was able to then, she went from speaking almost perfect Spanish to perfect English. She was bilingual in the space of 6 months. She just blossomed like a little butterfly, and it all had to do with her own sense of emotional security with her message. Not being told that it was okay to say this, not okay to say that, full throttle. And that's also that Mars in the third. Maybe she also had Mars in the third, because the more freedom she had to speak her mind, you could just see. And it was really a sight to behold, really a beautiful experience. And thinking about what you guys have all shared, it's really the heart of internalizing our message in a way that we feel secure to express whatever that message is in the world, so that I'm not just filling empty spaces, and I'm not just talking about the most recent movie, but I'm really talking about something of substance. And it doesn't matter then if the words are perfect. It's more, again, about the emotional content that those words evoke. And with looking at Mars and Gemini, then, it's the courage to speak these things, or it's the courage to initiate whatever actions we need to in order to bring out or to communicate, to express in whatever form these more vulnerable, or these messages that may be met with reactiveness, or even ourselves, as Ari was mentioning, how to dismantle our own emotional reactiveness to words. How to receive, as I'm sorry, I'm not going to pronounce your name right. Upasika? Upasika, sorry. Upasika, as you were sharing the beauty of receiving instead of becoming reactive. And Queen Elizabeth I from England, she had Mars in Gemini, and the power of how she was able to communicate in terms of, there will now be a united church. And I remember one of the quote that really to me speaks to the Gemini, but perhaps also to the Sag polarity, is she says, "My people will not be punished for expressing their beliefs or worshiping as they will. They will only be punished for violating the law." Mars and Gemini, like, here's the message underneath this, is that unity and diversity. You can worship, you can pray, freedom of expression. And a beautiful movie that makes me think of this archetype, you should watch it, it's on Netflix, it's called Freedom Writers. And it's really a great movie in that a teacher, she's put into a disadvantaged neighborhood, and they all tell her straight up before she goes in, she says, "Oh, don't even bother. Just go in, run through the motions. There's nothing you can do for these kids. You'll progress later. You'll get your little feather in the hat. Just essentially don't give them anything. Don't give them any energy, and just give up on them." And she goes in and she listens to their personal stories. She listens to what they live, how they live, what their fears are, what they feel most vulnerable in. And she's able to create a brand new writing. She gets them all together. She has them write their stories, and they're going to fire her because she puts so much energy into helping these kids recover their voice. And ultimately it culminates in a story called Freedom Writers, not like writing the bus, but writers, W-R-I-T-E-R. And she gets promoted. She gets to stay with her class. Her group is feeling like we want to write more. We want to express ourselves more. And it just came from that beauty of receptivity. She really, with Mars and Gemini, you might not think this, she didn't react. She didn't really, she initiated, she took action on the voices of others. Maybe that's a Libra dynamic, but it wasn't that she was in there trying to start something. It's that she received, and she simply took action on what she was receiving. And from that, a brand new body of work about these disadvantaged kids, their daily reality, Moon in the third, and why it was so hard for them, and you know, why people had almost given up on them, but gave a new perspective, and brought out their, through the writing, she really showed how smart they were, really tuned into their intellect, and dismantled all of these preconceived notions. So just an amazing film, and I really felt touched the heart of the Mars and Gemini, or Mars in the third archetype. I would say with that too, one closing thought in terms of the natural way to spiritualize is Yogananda. He has South Node in Scorpio in the third, and as a young man, he has a whole chapter in his book called Interviewing the Saints. And as a young man, he would go around and he would find these different saints and the different ways that they connected to spirit, to source there, and he would have them talk about their most natural expression. How do you, what has God meant to you in your life? How do you orient, and how did you get started on your path, and what's your most natural connection, and about their lives, so that he could get information about how to proceed in his own journey, perhaps. But very valuable information in terms of these lives of saints, and really electing the roots of what their life was about, and their own personal way of embracing source, and how they did it, and when you go to the root, all the branches take care of themselves. He revealed even though they had these different ways of expression, that their root was the same: unity and diversity, many paths leading to the same goal. So I really found that to be quite symbolic of the South Node in Scorpio in the third, getting to the heart, or getting to the core of words through these interviews.
Oh, you wanted to know what drives them, right? What makes them unique, what makes them different. And
yeah.
and I really, 7 paths, 7 chakras, 7 churches, 7 candles. That's what he taught, right? Many paths to the one.
Yes.
So we threw up a chart here because I wanted to mention this as a Mars and Gemini example. I had this client in the last week, and the chart says, "Why am I here?" I mean, don't we all want to know that? So oftentimes people will, come to me or schedule readings, and a lot of the questions are, what's my purpose? Why am I here? And this particular client has just come through a Saturn return not too long ago. So she's 29, I think, at this point. And Mars and Gemini was really interesting too, because the Solar Fire program, for some reason on my computer, it always starts with the Placidus, and I have to correct it to Porphyry, because that's what we use in JWG's Evolutionary Astrology. And that Mars was in the 9th house. And she's talking, and I'm thinking to myself, this isn't sounding right? What's driving her? What does she want? And obviously with COVID here, I mean, she's a server in a restaurant. She lost her job. She doesn't know at all what she wants to, or she doesn't have any direction in her life. She doesn't know what she can do. And I said, so let's just dream, put it out there. What's a dream for you? What's the closest thing that you can imagine that means anything? And, while she's answering the question, I'm correcting my computer to make sure it's the porphyry. The Mars moves into the 8th house, and she says to me this, not long ago, my grandmother was dying, and I was sitting with her. And I felt so much desire to help her in this transition, to help her feel better. I felt connected, so deeply connected to the other side. The words I was saying, I didn't feel like they were mine in a sense. And I felt that I was able to provide her the emotional comfort that she needed to make that transition. And it made me I felt so empowered to be in that seat next to her, helping her. And, of course, with being a sun in Libra and a Libra rising, of course, she's got a natural desire to help people. And you look at that 12th house, this kind of straddling both worlds. And the 8th house, Mars, is going to be somebody, in her case, that really that would do incredible work in hospice situations. And she hadn't even read any of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross books, who started the whole hospice program. So it was really, for me as an astrologer doing this for 20 years and just asking the question, what feels like it would mean more to you than anything? What is the dream? How can you envision doing something? Even if you don't know how to get there, what is it? And she hadn't even thought about doing this really for work until I asked her what has she done in her life that felt the best, in recent times. So I just wanted to share this too. And also just when you're looking at the chart from either Coke or Placidus or Porphyry, obviously I've been using Porphyry for 20 years. And in this one example, I mean, it was like right there in front of me as she was talking, and that Mars shifted, the house of death, right? And rebirth. And being a bridge for that. So she's so excited about this path that she feels like is her right work. So the ruler of that Mars in Gemini is Mercury in Virgo in the 12th. So right, that healing that you can offer somebody in that transition. So of course with the South Node in Leo, she does have a special sense of destiny. Like she did feel like she's come here to do something unique. North Node in Aquarius in the 4th. And offering emotional support for others who are leaving this world. So anyway, thank you, Deva, for that. All right, we're going to move to our last speaker, Tara All. Tara is an evolutionary astrologer working with the archetypes experientially. As a writer and teacher, Tara works with a broad range of metaphysics, from astrology to tarot, crystals, animal medicine, and the Hermetic principles. She's committed to supporting herself and others to be more honest, aware, real, and compassionate. All right, welcome, Tara.
Thank you, Kristin. So, are you guys hearing an echo?
No.
Sounds okay.
Okay, good. Awesome. So I have a South Node in Gemini in the 3rd house. So for those of you who can see this is what my notes look like. So I just wanted to give one person's, and then they continue on the back. So, whether I'll get to all of them, I don't know, but I wanted to give you a peek into my Gemini brain. Kristin, when you were just using that chart example, that really spoke to me, because some of the words we haven't used here for Gemini are language and translation. So we've talked about communication, but to me, one of the, and my teachers who have had strong Gemini, one of their greatest abilities is to, it's not just the words, but to somehow translate information in a way that people need to hear it, feel it, and receive it. So the polarity point with Sagittarius, oftentimes we have the intuitive wisdom, but it's with Gemini that we find the words, the language to actually share that. And so that is, for me, a big piece and a big gift of Gemini. And one reason why it's so connected with teaching and learning, right? Because there's also a fascination with learning different ways to present things or talk about things. Sometimes to hit home with something, and I don't even just mean in a chart reading, just in general, you've got to hit it from so many angles and hope that one of them's going to work. Gemini is really good at doing that. So the other thing, and Ari touched on this, but my big word for Gemini is always perception. Same with the third house, right? So perception is our reality. How we perceive life is how we then respond and act and move ourselves forward into life. So Gemini and Mercury in the third house are so important because what we think is literally what we're making and creating every moment in our day. So to me, we can't underestimate the power of that. I know we mentioned that sometimes that Gemini gets kind of a put in a superficial type of category. Another thing that can happen with Gemini is we'll just talk about Gemini, they change their mind or they're fickle, wishy-washy. And I want to address that just briefly here because the thing is about Gemini, it's about having an open mind. It's about having a beginner's mind. And so this is not to defend the times that we do change our mind and maybe that's not appropriate, right? That's a different conversation. But here's what happens with Gemini. New information comes into the situation. So it's not so much that it is a change to what was, it's there literally is now a new situation to consider. And so when you are working with Gemini, if you have a lot of strong Gemini, just appreciating that sometimes. It's a slight nuance thing, but it's different, right? It's like every moment I could get something new, of course I got to readdress the situation, right? Everything can change in the flip of a coin if you learn something new. And if you are being open-minded, like natural Gemini is, you're just going to have those experiences over and over again. In fact, you should get used to changing your mind. That's what's supposed to happen with Gemini. Your mind's supposed to change. Now, most of us all have experience with both Sagittarius and Gemini being attached to what they know. They both can be incredible know-it-alls. So that side is shared with Wolfe. I'm one of those people. I know. I feel like I'm in my mid-40s, and I feel sometimes for the first time I'm open to really learn, because for the first time I don't need to know. Like that's a big deal for me. So for Gemini, sometimes is a big piece. Another thing, Kristin, you brought up in the very beginning is the bridge. And Gemini is all about connections, right? Gemini, and then the third house, of course, and Mercury rule the nervous system, right? So in the body, that's the body's messenger system, from the neurotransmitters to the hormones, everything that's getting things, from one thing to the other. It's our wiring. Literally, it's how we make connections between things. So that part's going on the inside while we're also doing it externally. And that can be a very mundane type of connection, like weaving letters together to make words into sentences, into paragraphs. But it can also be really deep at the soul level, because another important bridge, which we call the Antakarana, is the bridge between the personality and the soul, or the lower and the higher self. Gemini is part of all connections and bridges. So it's part of bridging every experience when you have that. That example of drowning in the water, part of that to me was a bridge being extended. Like the parts of yourself are no longer separated. So it's interesting because anytime we have a connection or a bridge, we're dealing with at least two different sides or parts. So we know that Gemini is an archetype of separation, but it's about connecting those dots or connecting those pieces. So at its higher soul level, to me, it's about union. It's just that in order to experience the connection, we have to first break it all apart and figure out how the pieces come together, right? So Gemini to me is like puzzles all the time. Mm-hmm. And those of us with strong Gemini, we love to see where it fits. We talked about this too, but like categories or what's this, what's that, how do they come together? So those, I think, that was my main things on just Gemini. Another fun thing is sometimes when I'm thinking about the difference between Sagittarius and Gemini, Sagittarius is big exploration, right? I mean, it's limitless, like it's the whole cosmos. Gemini is like big exploration in a small space. Like Gemini is like in a curiosity shop, but it still likes to be in its familiar environment, which is why, Ari was talking about the map, like it likes the map. Right? Sag doesn't need the map, but Gemini still is attached on some level to the map. So it's just in as much into exploration, but a little bit of a different containment and a little bit of a different feel. And so just even playing around with this sometimes on your own, you can see how those two things express differently. Gemini will be more comfortable exploring something that has some edges, right? Versus just a complete open-widedness. So my planets are Venus and Saturn. And just a couple of things about the third house. So, and this, again, these archetypes, whether it be Mercury, the third house, and Gemini, those archetypes are all related. But planets in the third house are part of how you perceive and see life. So one thing when you think about looking at the third house, yes, it's how you communicate. That part we know. But I want to talk here about the filter. Because the third house for all of us in some respects is our mental filter. It's how we're seeing life. And so in turn, it's how we're responding to life and how we're acting in life. So for example, let's first take Venus in the third house. What kind of filter might someone with Venus in the third house be seeing life as? What might their perspective on life be? There are a million examples. So let me just give you a few. They could be seeing life through the artist's eyes, looking for the beauty or the ugliness, right? There's a contrast. Venus wants to choose and judge from fairness to beauty to what feels comfortable. So this Venus in the third house very much can be looking at life through that lens. Also, Venus is so intertwined with relationships, there can be looking at life through the relationship lens, looking through someone else's eyes, looking through it in a cooperative partnership type of way. And then Venus, of course, being associated with love. There's a huge filter of love here. Someone with Venus in the third house could be having lots of love experiences to learn about life. Because here's the thing, any planet in the third house, you end up in learning, thinking, or communicating situations. The thing that changes the flavor is the planet itself, and of course the sign it's in, right? So Venus in the third house, what are we trying to learn about? Or what are we trying to explore? Relationships. It's going to be huge for someone with Venus in the third house. And art, by the way, is also a relationship. You know, art is all about the relationship between different mediums, different things, different contrasts, right? Different light and shadow, all these pieces. It's also exploring feelings and what it means to make connections, what it is to cooperate. So Venus in the third house, this is in a more kind of just straightforward way. You see people here oftentimes who are writers or speakers, some type of, because Venus adds a beautiful quality and a harmonizing quality to words and to language. So oftentimes you'll see that come through with that placement. Or even just communicators of some sort. Because again, that drive to learn and explore through relationships. The last thing about Venus, wherever Venus is in the chart, we need to find serenity. We need to find calm. We need to find how we can get back to equilibrium. And so with Venus in the third house, ooh, that's all up here. So Venus in the third house is going to be needing to do and choose things and people and experiences that help them find that peace of mind, which, by the way, will be very different from Saturn there, right? I mean, you can already start to feel the difference in the flavor of now all of a sudden we switch the lens to Saturn. Well, one thing I didn't say, so Stephen Forrest talks, and he got this from Robert Hand, about the third house being the house of heresy. And I love this because ultimately the third house is about poking holes in things. It's about raising the questions, right? It's questioning the certainty. It's questioning the one truth. We right now collectively have the North Node in Gemini. We're going through this. We all know there's no question we're going through this. But any planet in your third house, the same thing. You need to ask questions around the function of that planet. You need to test out different ways, variety, you need to be curious. You may have been too set in one way in a past life, for example, around relationships. And now you have Venus in the third house and you need to come up with a new perception, perspective, ideas, experiences all around relationships. So Saturn in the third house, it could be seeing life through just very practical eyes, right? We know Saturn is not likely to be looking for the beauty in something. Saturn oftentimes is going to be looking for, can this situation last? Is it going to be safe? Do I need to be cautious, right? What's going on here? Is someone in charge? So it can also be looking at life through the eyes of authority. And whether you accept that authority for yourself or give that authority to someone else, that's a whole different personal conversation. but Saturn in the third house, there's going to be issues around authority when it comes to words, language, beliefs. There's going to be issues around that for sure. That's part of what's supposed to be happening there. Saturn, in some respects, is supposed to stabilize. We take ownership. We take responsibility. We become accountable. We become masters. We know sometimes Saturn in the third house can lean towards learning disabilities or even a slowed ability to catch up with things. But the flip side is mastery. So you have to hold that loosely. And what seems, Deva had a perfect example, what seems slow or even just different to some of us does not mean that it's not tuned in on another level. So I always caution this around, especially around Saturn, where yes, we deal with limitations, but sometimes the limitations aren't what we think they are. The limitations literally are in our head, which is so a Saturn in the third house thing. What else do I want to say about Saturn? So here's the other thing. Because the third house is so much how we're responding to life, Venus in the third house, people can come across very cooperative. You know, they can be very easy to be around. Saturn in the third house, not always so easy. Saturn, where Venus gravitates towards relationships, Saturn gravitates towards solitude. And Saturn can be serious, sometimes feels cold, sometimes feels strict, sometimes feels withdrawn. So that doesn't mean the person is that way. That means the way that they communicate and the way that they're sort of geared to see and experience life is coming through that filter. There's just more of a seriousness to it. They also can be very much the voice of authority. You know, I can tell you there's probably lots of people who have Saturn in the third house who get the last word. And I have Saturn conjunct Mercury, so, you know, I have some experience with that too. Yeah. Yeah, so the whole idea of exploring in the third house for Saturn, exploring and learning about responsibility, discipline, learning about language, right? And even just learning to face your fears of failure can be, because Saturn in the third house can be the perception can be that life is hard, right? So there's learning sometimes through harder experiences that you can do it, because Saturn's also manifestation. So taking what's in your mind and manifesting. Another very super powerful Saturn in the third house. Yeah.
Yeah, the discipline to manifest. Any thoughts, Stacie?
So Tara, as you were speaking, about Venus in Gemini, it just really kind of brought me back to my childhood and how scared I was in school. You know, institutionalized education is not really for my brain, but really the majority of what I experienced at that time was just social learning, comparing myself to what I'm seeing the other kids do, and, you know, seeing how I am in this circumstance and how others are in that circumstance, and just learning. So that's an interesting aspect of the Venus in Gemini process as well.
Well, and what you just described is just as powerful learning as getting something from a book. I'm just saying we just all learn different ways. So the planets and the signs in that third house help us kind of recognize kind of our avenues, our best avenues for doing that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, wouldn't it be nice if our schools could accommodate that diversity a little bit better? So
that's up for us. I mean, that's up to us. We have to recreate that.
Well, you had quite a combination there. You've got, you know, these cardinal archetypes really, but with it respect with Libra and the Saturn with the Capricorn element, and so we really took you in two different directions with that one. But thank you. I loved, you know, really both sides of that, and you just nailed so many descriptions of those energies, and especially with the Capricorn. I was really thinking about some people that I know with that position. All right, so you have Saturn conjunct Mercury, but not in the third house. Is that right?
I have Venus in the third house on the IC conjunct Mercury and Saturn that are both across in the fourth.
Oh my goodness, wow. Well, you are perfect then to discuss these archetypes. And just Saturn, oh, go ahead.
I said just crazy enough to do it, really.
All right, well, this has been an incredible webinar of just taking a tour through Gemini, third house, Mercury, And we have a Q&A. Any questions? We're putting it out there. We've got these great minds here.
We do have one question from Sarah. And she says, could it be that incessant talking and noise of speaking, Gemini, could be a defense mechanism, overtly or subconsciously intended to drown out the voice of Source, square to Pisces? Especially when considering the distortions of this current reality, that voice of Source could be too much to bear for some. Just some thoughts.
Yeah, and also a lot of times people that talk a lot or incessantly or gossip or what have you, they're really running away from whatever it is that they're needing to address. Like my first story, what are you running from, Kristin? All the running. And so even some of the funniest people I know are self-proclaimed avoiders of their emotional body. So the talking is the nervous talking, and yeah, is absolutely a part of that. And there's a need to learn comfortable silence. The evolved version or expression, the evolved expression, a natural expression of the Gemini Mercury archetype third house is to learn, is in evolving into comfortable silence. So anybody else want to add anything to that question or comment?
I think it's very common.
Mm-hmm.
So many people are using the mind to run away from the emotional body. So, silence is freaky.
Yeah, it
Can
is.
be, Can be. Especially with strangers. It's with strangers you get that nervous chit-chat more than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And to be silent with a stranger is it's a mastery. It's like Tara says, it's like doesn't happen by itself sometimes. You leave the mind alone. It's just habit. The third house is habits.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and in terms of incessant noise and talking to avoid the voice of the Source, this is why Yogananda, his life mission was to teach meditation, to quiet it down, because sometimes we have ideas about the Source. The Source is supposed to look like this or that, or be defined as this and that, and you really can't know the Source through those designations. And so it really takes effort to quiet the mind, to sit down and be silent, and to become aware of reconnecting from within, I guess is the best way I can say it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it takes discipline, or else it runs you.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what that third house. That was a really good point about habits, especially mental habits, which again, mental extrapolates to everything.
Okay, there's one more question coming here in a second. On that note too, yeah, I remember Jeffrey talking, it was more as it relates to Virgo, but with Mercury, anytime a negative thought comes in, to immediately create a counter thought, right? To if it's something that's not helpful for you to be thinking about, right? To do that Aquarian, just kind of objective look at what you're thinking about, and then think of something else to replace it. That is the counter thought to that. I am not then turns into I am. I am not good enough. I am good enough. And thoughts are powerful. Again, I can't say this enough with this energy. And if anybody listening has strong Gemini planets in Gemini, it's really powerful. What you think about, what you energize, what you visualize, what you tell yourself is incredibly powerful. So make it work for you. Okay, there's another question.
Yes, I have a question from Mary.
Uh-huh.
How does one deal with a really negative, disturbing thought? Push it away, let it pass, or is there some message that is wanting to be communicated?
Never push it away. That's another thought, pushing away the negative thought. And that's just creating the duality and the conflict. That's half the answer, is don't run away from it. Let
Well,
it be.
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, Kristin? Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think I kind of answered it in that last pass with just, you know, you can step outside of yourself and kind of look at what you're thinking about. And you can, when you're objective and you're not emotionally attached to what is coming into you, and you can find out why it's coming in. Is this a natural thought that's coming in? You know, is this the shadow? Because when we're doing really deep growth, when the evolution of the soul is happening and you're making strides of growth and having breakthroughs, you will immediately experience something, or very soon after, that tries to undermine your growth. That's like the greater the light, the greater the shadow. So if that negative thought that's coming in and it continues to repeat, you know, how many times did Jesus say, Satan, get behind me? And in one day, a lot. This is a real thing. This is pure energy. And so, yeah, it's important to recognize, not to pretend that it doesn't exist. Like Upasika said, you know, recognize it and look at it and stare at it. And again, creating a counter thought, if it's something negative like I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough, that's definitely something that needs to be replaced with something that is true, which is you are.
Yeah.
I want to add something that you look at the yod between Gemini, Scorpio, and Capricorn. So we have to understand that our thoughts are relevant. They're, you know, the thoughts that we really move towards have significance according to really what we're working with on a soul level. And so it really points us back to what are the core, predominantly unconscious programs that we're still becoming self-aware of. So we have these, you know, thoughts can be so painful, so difficult. And this is, you know, even though I've been meditating for many years, I still find it a struggle, you know, to get quiet. And that's where the 10th house comes in. Discipline. We all have to discipline our minds. And that's a big part of the work with Gemini, you know, to really become self-aware and to not be unconsciously drawn out by the thoughts that we create that are incredibly hurtful, incredibly defeating. It takes work.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, that word today has come up a few hard, strong times. Thanks, Tara, for that too. It is such an important word for people that have a predominance of Gemini in the chart, because that is what it's required. And Ari, thank you for mentioning the yod. That's so important, because we're all here to evolve. We're all looking to embrace the polarity so we can evolve. And if, by the way, if you're not feeling uncomfortable, then you're not evolving. And I don't mean you have to be miserable all the time, but evolution is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. And it's learning to be okay with that. And, you know, to be vulnerable is part of what that entails and involves in order to evolve. So look at Guide My Feet. Ari's going to sing for us. We get our music to complete this wonderful webinar. Thank you all.
Okay, so this song actually came through at a time when I was faced with a decision. Now, decisions aren't Gemini. Decisions, you can say, are Mars on a more basic level. You know, what choice am I going to make in life? But what I was bound by were options. And I found my mind moving towards collecting a lot of facts, a lot of information, and I was bombarded with perspectives. And included in the realm of perspective is we have the air trine, right? So it's like people's opinions, people's personal preferences, that becomes data too, to add to the mix. So I got to a point, you know, I have a Mercury-Neptune conjunction, so it ultimately brings me back to surrender, to not rely upon my own thinking, my own logic, to go somewhere else. So this song came from that place, and it really speaks to the what's in the center and sort of down beneath and beyond the dualities that we move into to find peace, to find our resolution. How's the guitar?
Beautiful.
Forests, but I've
mind. Run around in a hurry. Leave this moment behind. Oh, I noticed the answers in the center of my heart. Begin in this moment, and it's now I may start. So guide my feet to walk with you, to walk with love. Guide my feet to walk with you, to walk with love. Guide my feet to walk with you, to walk with love. Guide my feet to walk with you, to walk with love. Guide my feet to walk with you, to walk with love. Guide my feet to walk with you, to walk with love.
Thank you
That
for
is
the
how you
music.
do an uncomfortable, not uncomfortable, a comfortable silence.
Yeah.
That was beautiful, Ari.
Lovely.
Thank you all for joining us today, and for those of you watching and listening. We're very excited also for our next panel discussion next Saturday already, the 25th of July, the natural astrology and the archetype of Cancer, 4th house, and the moon. And so we'll bid adieu for now, and thank you for our wonderful speakers and our music. And until next time, y'all, namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.